So there's an Elden Ring mod called Elden Ring Reforged. This is arguably the biggest overhaul mod that currently exists for the game, and on top of tweaking a few thousand different things, it also adds new stuff like entirely new combat mechanics, new bosses, new spells, and yes, difficulty options. You can now play the game on normal, hard, or master mode, and as you go up in difficulty, enemies hit harder, have extra health, and most critically, even have their AI adjusted to be especially brutal. Because I know people like to watch me suffer, I wanted to experience this mod through the lens of its hardest difficulty. So that would be master mode, right? Actually no, because there's a separate set of co-op specific difficulties that take things even further. Beyond co-op hard mode, beyond co-op master mode, there exists co-op raid mode. This cranks things up to an even more ridiculous degree by giving bosses access to special moves and AI adjustments exclusive to this difficulty. Raid mode is so rough that the mod creator recommends 4 or more players if you want to attempt it. Like 5 or 6 players is probably ideal. For someone whose skill at the game is a far cry from some of the really talented challenge runners out there, I thought this all raised an interesting question. Can someone like me beat this mod on raid mode? But I wanted to take it one step further. Is it possible for me to not only complete this mod on its hardest difficulty, but do so with less than the recommended number of players? Can I beat raid mode with only 2 friends? Let's find out. But first, the sponsored part of the video. Patches, you're a gamer, right?
You know how it is.
I'll take that as a yes. I want you to imagine a world where Elden Ring, Dark Souls, and Dark Souls 2 are all combined into one beautiful specimen. If you can't picture it, that's okay, because this video is sponsored by Opera GX, the internet browser for gamers like you, and they let you make terrifying combinations with the GX mods feature. Elden Ring theme, colors, and wallpaper? Check. Dark Souls 2 Majula background music? Hell yeah. Dark Souls 1 keyboard and tab sounds? Now we're talking. It's easy to swap out mods, and you can find a bunch more in the GX store.
Where you won't need a refund, because everything is top notch.
Actually, you won't need a refund because it's all free, but sure. And Patches, I know you like to be in control, and for that, you can use the GX control feature to set limits on the browser's CPU or RAM usage, so you don't need to close any of the 50 tabs you keep open. The difference between other browsers can be pretty massive. And lastly, Patches, when it comes to things that are a pain in the ass, I know you're an expert. So I'm sure you also know it can be a pain in the ass to switch browsers. Luckily, that's not the case with Opera GX. You just click a couple buttons and boom, everything from your previous browser is imported.
Cripes, you make this nonsense seem, well, less nonsensical.
No problem, man. If you want to try out Opera GX for yourself, check out the link in the description. And thanks again to Opera GX for sponsoring. Now here's the rest of the video. So first off, I invited Raz and Yakko to be the 2 friends who would help me out. I think it's worth mentioning that neither of them were challenge runners, so there was no danger of me somehow getting carried through this playthrough. Anyway, we began by each choosing a starting class. I went with Prisoner, Yakko went with Vagabond, and Raz went with Guide, one of the new classes that was added. I was going to focus on Intelligence, Yakko on Strength, and Raz on Faith. This seemed like a solid initial setup that would give us some variety and a wide range of different tools to take advantage of. Now, I already covered the broad strokes, but what exactly is being changed with this special raid mode difficulty? Here's a list of the changes to enemies and bosses, but in terms of raw numbers being adjusted, here are the 3 most important ones. 113% extra health, 35% extra damage, and 42% less poise damage received. And keep in mind, this is all on top of the extra health and resistances that bosses get by default whenever you do co-op. Now what about this bullet point? Hard enemy effects and raid mode AI changes. This is where the real challenge comes in. Let's go over hard enemy effects first. All bosses now have new, quote, hard AI. What this means is that they have new attack strings and combos while also being far more aggressive. Basically, it's now much harder to avoid attacks and find openings to deal damage. But as an example, you know how bosses will sometimes slow walk, side strafe, or be a bit passive between attacks? That's more or less entirely gone now, with bosses now having a much higher chance of sprinting forward and attacking instead. Here's a side-by-side comparison of Margit so you can get a better idea of what I'm talking about. I really want to emphasize that this increased aggression completely changed the dynamic of boss fights. Also, bosses now slowly regenerate health over time, which in effect makes their already long health bars even longer. And as a way of making combat against normal enemies tougher, backstabs no longer work mid-combat and are now exclusive to stealth. All of this is layered together with raid mode AI changes to add just that extra bit of fuck you energy on a case-by-case basis. For example, Radahn's collapsing star spell, what if that had tripled the number of projectiles and quite literally could not be avoided by rolling? Oh, and one more thing, the HP and FP flask, they had their effectiveness cut nearly in half. Just look at this. Mix all of that together with the changes the mod makes regardless of difficulty, such as nerfing spells, weapons, and talismans across the board, and you have a recipe for pain. Most of this video will be dedicated to following our playthrough in a chronological order, but before we get to that, it's important that I explain some of the biggest new combat mechanics and reworks that were added to the mod. For starters, spell casting has been completely reworked. There's a new category of spells called generator spells. These are fast spells that do far less damage than their base game counterparts, but when you hit an enemy with them, you actually gain FP. For example, the generator spell that I used for most of the game was Glintstone Pebble. It would cost 5 FP to cast, but I would gain 10 FP whenever it made contact with an enemy. So by repeatedly casting these generator spells, I could slowly but surely refill all of my FP, and technically have access to unlimited FP. Additionally, melee attacks also grant a small amount of FP, but it's a far less effective way of recovering FP than using a generator. There's also a bit of passive FP regen whenever you're in combat, but again, it's so slow that you might not even notice it. So if you want to be a spellcaster, generator spells are going to be your bread and butter. There's a couple things to keep in mind though. One, very little damage comes from the generator itself, so they really are mainly just for getting your FP back. And two, FP costs for the real spells have been greatly increased across the board. This varies from spell to spell and ranges anywhere from a 50% to 100% increase. For example, in the base game, Rock Sling costs 18 FP to cast. In this mod, it's 36 FP. Between this and the reduction to FP recovery from the Cerulean Flask, my average DPS as a spellcaster felt noticeably lower than base game Elden Ring, because large portions of the fight would be dedicated solely to casting the generator spell. It probably goes without saying, but all this applies to incantations as well, so Raz was in the same boat. Also, and I'll point them out as I come across them in my playthrough, this mod adds a number of completely new sorceries and incantations. In fact, Raz began the game with a new incantation that happened to be a generator spell called Golden Star, a quick little holy projectile that homes in on targets. There are several more key combat changes though. There's now a deflection system similar to how it operates in Sekiro or Lies of P. If you perform a timed block just before an enemy's attack hits, you can completely negate the attack. And yes, this can be done while two-handing weapons. There's even an option to enable blocking with your left-hand weapon to allow for deflex while dual wielding. There are two different types of deflex, normal and perfect. And if you manage to land a perfect deflect, not only will you lose 0 stamina from the block, you'll also gain a 15% damage boost on your next attack. While this is a very cool and satisfying addition that slots in rather seamlessly to the core combat of Elden Ring, we only use it sparingly. Partly because we're bad, but partly because of how guard breaks were reworked. As a reminder for how they work in the base game, guard breaks occur when you attempt to block an attack that you don't have enough stamina for. When this happens, you transition into a special stun animation for a second. This puts you in a vulnerable position where there's a good chance they'll hit you with a follow-up attack. But a key point to remember is that the guard break itself doesn't hurt you, only the follow-up. This is not the case for the mod. Here, getting guard broken instantly deals 25% of your max health as damage. This makes blocking, and by extension deflecting, far more dangerous and risky than it might be otherwise. And if you think you can get away with spamming block, you'd be mistaken, because it not only disables perfect deflex, it also makes your stamina plummet. Speaking of stamina management in general seems tougher in this mod. For example, heavy jumping attacks, one of the best moves in the base game, now cost significantly more stamina to use. This is a big deal for strength builds. Dodging receives some changes too. You can now do the Bloodborne dodge if your equip load is light. On top of just looking cool, this provides an extra iframe while dodging and lets you act out of the roll 2 frames faster than a medium roll. I like this change a lot because in the base game, light rolls are nearly identical to medium rolls, so it usually didn't feel worth considering. There's also a new duck animation that replaces the backstep and is available to all equip loads. While it has less iframes than dodging, the neat thing about this move is that it physically lowers your hurtbox to the ground, and because the hitboxes of Elden Ring are generally very accurate, this can allow for situations where you're physically ducking under an attack after the iframes have run out. In fact, there's a secret tutorial boss at the Fringe Folk Hero's Grave near the start of the game that shows you how this works. You need to use a variety of ducking, dodging, and jumping to avoid the attacks. And instead of attacking yourself, simply avoiding attacks is how you deal damage to the boss. Also, equip load itself has been reworked. Every class starts with an equip load of exactly 100, but it can no longer be increased by leveling up. On top of that, all armor weight has been doubled. What this means is that if you want to wear heavy armor, you're probably going to be heavy rolling. And endurance is now an inherently less valuable stat as it's only used for raising your max stamina and nothing else. The last major change I want to mention at the start is the new fortune system. These are essentially a set of subclasses you can select from that add unique mechanics to enhance specific playstyles. They also each come with buffs and debuffs. For example, I chose the Sorcerer Fortune. This gave me an ability where every 9 spells I cast, the next non-generator sorcery would get a 50% damage boost. It also slightly increased my FP. This came with the trade-off of lowering my max stamina, lowering my poise, and greatly decreasing the duration of special effects like buffs from spells or incantations. Raz and Yakko went with Cleric and Paladin respectively. And I don't want to just be listing things off for this entire video, so pause if you're curious what their fortunes did. But yeah, pretty neat system overall. And with all that out of the way, let's get into discussing the actual playthrough. We start off by getting our asses kicked by the Tree Sentinel. He now uses the Holy Ground Ash of War to heal himself throughout the fight, so we really stood no chance at dealing enough damage to counter this at this point in the game. But even though we weren't successful, we made a very important discovery during these fights. And this discovery is easily one of my favorite changes this mod makes. Remember when I mentioned that my HP and FP flask had their effectiveness cut in half? Well, I left out one important detail. If you use a flask while standing near an ally, they receive the HP or FP as well. This is such a simple and fun change, and I know I'm going to sound hyperbolic here, but this one change legitimately resulted in some of the most cooperative feeling boss fights I've experienced in a FromSoft game. Suddenly, instead of just worrying about myself and pressing the heal button when my health was low, I was constantly keeping an eye on my friends and often waiting to heal or recover FP so I could share my flask. Instead of only watching the boss and how its position related to my own, I had to consider the position of everyone else and if we had time to group up and heal. This is the type of thing I want to see more of in FromSoft games if they're going to continue pursuing co-op as a core feature. And by that I mean more ways of immediately and impactfully affecting your co-op partners. Speaking of co-op, this is a good time to mention that this playthrough was being done using the Seamless Co-op mod as well. I'm sure most of you have heard of this, but in case you haven't, Seamless Co-op allows you to play together with your friends where everyone gets their own loot, everyone gets credit for boss kills, you can spectate your friends if you die mid-boss fight, you can teleport to different locations together, and everyone gets to ride Torrent. It's basically the way to play the game with friends. And goddamn, it's so much more convenient. Also, Rot Essence. Pause if you're curious. But yeah, the next several hours were spent just running around, exploring, and fighting bosses in Limgrave. I think the main thing that stood out to me about this experience was that I actually had to take Limgrave seriously. Like, as a veteran player of Souls games, encounters in Limgrave can be complete pushovers where you'll beat a boss in less than 30 seconds. Not the case with raid mode. Even cave bosses like the Beastmen of Fair Missoula had us scrambling around to stay alive. This all climaxed when we reached the Leonine Misbegotten at Castle Morn. I remember this guy barely posing a threat when I found him in my first playthrough, but now, I'd actually lock in and focus. In addition to being far tankier, he also seemed to heal a chunk of his health whenever he did his roar attack. We were running around, making callouts, healing each other, it was great. When we finally got him, we'd spent a solid 5 minutes fighting him on just that attempt. Far longer than it would take in the base game. While we were here, I noticed that there were some weird looking rocks in the ocean nearby. Turns out that the mod creator added a jumping puzzle here just for the hell of it. These jumps were pretty finicky to say the least. Holy shit.
That one's really hard.
I don't think there's anywhere to go.
No, you gotta jump to that next rock.
Oh, there is one that's slightly underwater. Will it count? Fuck, I missed. I overshot it. I overshot it.
Dude, I hate this. After struggling for half an hour, our reward for doing this was a glowing rune piece on the ground. This is a new type of collectible that was added to the mod, and they're scattered all over the map. They're usually not nearly as difficult to get as this one, but they're often hidden just enough to be a fun little surprise when you notice them. For every 20 you collect, you can trade them in at the finger reader to get a binding rune. These all provide small passive buffs, like a 1% increase to your max stamina or FP. So yeah, nothing crazy, but a fun addition for people who like collecting things. Another form of collectible that was added is the Codex of All-Knowing. This is an in-game Pokédex that allows you to see a list of every enemy in the game. Not only that, but you can check it for info on item drops and what damage types enemies are weak against. You just use this new consumable item on an enemy to mark them, and after killing a marked enemy, they get added to the Codex. On the Weeping Peninsula, one of the caves we completed gave us the Disciple's Rotten Branch. This is a new weapon added to the mod, and it became the weapon Raz used for most of the playthrough. It's a spear with built-in Scarlet Rot buildup, but it doubles as a new weapon type, a weapon catalyst. As the name implies, it's a weapon that can be used as a catalyst. So, you can alternate between attacking and spellcasting without needing both a weapon and a catalyst. And you can two-hand a weapon for the entire fight without needing to switch back to one-handing to cast a spell. While we're still in Limgrave, I might as well mention another new addition, archery challenges. There's a few of these scattered across the map, but basically you need to hit all of the glowing scarabs that appear by using a ranged weapon within a short time limit. Due to the fact that bows had received a rework that involved them having significantly less range than the base game, this took a few tries, but once we got it, our reward was a color palette swap we could apply to our armor. Obviously this implementation is kinda scuffed, but I really like the idea. It's always fun seeing people mix and match different armor sets to form their own unique fashion in Souls games, and adding additional color palettes would take it to the next level. And while I have many complicated thoughts on the recent Lords of the Fallen game, they have a similar color swap system in that game too, and it's something I wish FromSoft would consider adding to their next game. Anyway, after a few hours of exploring, I felt like we were ready to take on Margit. Even though we were prepared, the fight was still tough, with Margit having a couple new moves. For example, he now throws 5 daggers at once instead of 1, making it both harder to avoid and more likely that someone else would get caught in the crossfire. The main issue though, like I mentioned near the beginning of the video, is that he's far more aggressive, giving us fewer openings. But there's 3 of us, and he can't chase all of us down at the same time, no matter how aggressive he is. So whoever wasn't actively being targeted had the freedom to focus more on damage dealing than avoiding attacks, especially when they had ranged options like me or Raz. Also, and this is true for most of the bigger bosses, usually it was more effective for us to just attack without landing the critical hit whenever he was staggered, because the 3 of us together dealt more damage than just the critical hit from one of us. In the end, Margit wasn't too bad, and we got him on our 4th try. As you watch us run through Stormvale Castle, there are 2 more important changes this mod makes that I think are important context for our upcoming struggle. First, stats have been altered such that it requires more investment to reach the same numbers in the base game. For example, reaching the soft cap of 60 vigor in the base game now requires an investment of 70 vigor in the mod. Second, all weapon damage has been reworked such that they have lower base damage but increased scaling. Both of these changes together mean that you need to level up more to reach the same levels of power in the base game. And the early game in particular is rough since all of your stats are low. Moving on, here's a clip of me horribly missing a jump attack, but watch closely. Did you see that? My character flashed white for a second, and that's because a version of plunging attacks from Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3 has been brought back. It'll only trigger if you're in the air for long enough, but landing one of these doubles the damage of your jumping attack. I really like this change since it rewards paying attention to the environment and looking for opportunities to drop down on enemies. Some of the best parts of these games are when the combat and environment overlap in meaningful ways, and this change is a good example of that. Godric was up next, and this is where we first started to get nervous about the difficulty. He has some new stuff like a faster fire sweep, and he'll now combo his fire explosion attack into an immediate fire sweep after. Ultimately though, all of us were playing pretty sloppy with our dodging, and while that's fine for getting through the base game, it's not enough when the fights last 6+ minutes and your healing has been reduced.
The difficulty has been upped. What is your morale at right now, Raz? Like, what's your state of mind?
Fucking bad, dude.
Godric was definitely a big step up from Margit, but we managed to get him after having Yakko play more of a tank role. He managed to hold aggro for a good chunk of the fight, which enabled me and Raz to play more aggressively with our spellcasting. Then, after a dozen attempts, we got him. With Godric down, it was time to leave Limgrave behind and head into Caelid. The modded version of Caelid was notably scarier, and I'll start with a very memorable encounter we had in the swamp. But before that, I should explain a couple key changes that facilitated this. The first is that Torrent had been modified. He was no longer immune to poison or scarlet rot when running through swamps. This is one of those things that always confuse me about the base game, because love them or hate them, swamps have always represented an environmental threat that demanded your attention, but you could ignore almost all of them due to Torrent. So yeah, I think this change makes you take swamps more seriously. The second key change was that accessing the treasure rooms of ruins had been reworked. Now, you need to find and interact with all the blue sigils in the area to reveal the way in, and this interaction process renders your character motionless and vulnerable for a few seconds. So that brings us to that memorable swamp encounter I mentioned. I wanted to get into the ruins in the swamp so I could pick up Rocksling and the Meteorite Staff, but between Torrent getting scarlet rotted, the multiple different blue sigils we needed to interact with, the reduced effectiveness of our healing flask, and the sheer volume of enemies, this was insane.
Oh shit.
How? I'm already gonna die.
You should not have gone for that.
I don't know, I feel lucky.
But all jokes aside, this was actually kind of fun. This is another example of a location I would never meaningfully interact with in the base game. I'd run in on Torrent, grab what I wanted, and leave. So it's cool to see an area remixed into a completely different encounter with only a couple small changes. On a similar note, Celia was also a different experience because Torrent was disabled for it. I think most people usually just hop across the rooftops on horseback, but it's totally doable on foot with some precise jumping. While we were here, I also grabbed Night Comet and the Staff of Loss for later. Up on the cliffs nearby, we ran into another new feature in the mod, a Spirit Hawk. These were scattered around in a few different locations on the map, and upon killing it, a nearby latent spirit spring was awakened. This created a new shortcut back up to this part of the map. And this was especially useful here because we spent the next 10 minutes trying to jump along the giant tree branches that were nearby. And every time we messed up, we used the spirit spring to try again. We did all this so we could get a new incantation for Raz, Scarlet Papillion. This is a new spell to the mod, and it's a generator spell as well. It inflicts a bit of scarlet rot buildup on enemies, but unfortunately it was too minor and too slow to get much use from Raz. However, it was useful when we spent the next half hour choosing Commander O'Neill, because Raz was able to use the arcing trajectory of the spell to take cover from the archers while still hitting the boss.
Oh no! Raz, what are you doing?
Okay, we got it. Alright. Doing this gave us the gold needle to progress Millicent's questline, and doing that allows us to access Gallery Shop where I bought Night Maiden's Mist. I also grabbed the Eternal Darkness sorcery from the tower nearby for later. While we're here, I think it's worth mentioning that the mod more or less removed easy access to all of the high-level smithing materials you can get in the earlier parts of the game. For example, this exploding scarab usually drops a Somber Smithing Stone 8, but now it drops a Somber Smithing Stone 3. These types of changes were made across the entire map, and the result is that our weapons were pretty much always a few levels lower than they would have been otherwise. Since it seemed like we were making steady progress in Caelid, I decided it was time to head to Redmane Castle. Here's how that went.
Oh my god.
I dodged it.
I think that's why we died.
Oh.
Nice dodge.
They home in on you.
Yeah, any advice?
Nope.
It hit me! What?
Oh fuck yeah, dude! It targeted
No,
you.
that's great.
What the fuck? So yeah, simply getting to the castle is an actual challenge now due to the ridiculous tracking the catapults have. Assuming one of your friends doesn't just tank it for you, you'll need to double jump to the side with precise timing to avoid it. And this serves as a fun introduction to one of my favorite changes this mod makes. Redmane Castle has been redesigned so that's more of a proper dungeon. It's no Stormvale Castle by any means, but it's better than nothing and a more memorable part of the game now. As a reminder for outfunctions in the base game, if you come to Redmane before the festival starts, all you need to do is go around the back of the castle, walk in, and then take a straight shot to the boss room, with the only real hazard being these guys with flamethrowers. With the mod, however, there are new barriers, locked doors, and level geometry added to prevent this, and you now need to snake your way through a bunch more areas with new enemy layouts to reach the boss room as you unlock shortcuts along the way. Super cool. We also found a new painting that was added, the Falling Sky painting, and just like the ones in the base game, it presented us with a little puzzle of needing to find where the image depicted on the painting was located. It would be a lot later in the playthrough before I actually got around to finding it, but it was in the Seal for River area, and it gave me access to a couple new spells I sadly didn't end up using. Back to Redmane, it's important to note that we were very underleveled for this, so we had to rely on a variety of cheesy tactics. My favorite tactic was making heavy use of Night Maiden's Mist alongside other ranged attacks while we tried staying in safe zones. No shame in this.
There's a little shame.
Then, after a bit more running around and getting chased by enemies, we finally made it to the site of grace outside the boss room, which was now accessed by going all the way around to the left and dropping down next to it. And that brings us to Azash, Pride of the Redmanes, a brand new boss fight. Or at least, it's a recolored line enemy with some new fire attacks. We tried fighting him a few times, but we quickly realized we were far too underleveled and undergeared to beat him right now. Besides, if what was functionally Radahn's pet dog was this tough, we had zero shot at beating Radahn himself. For now, it seemed like a good idea to leave Caelid behind and come back later. However, before we left, I wanted to grab a weapon that seemed more useful than what I was using, even if I was primarily a spellcaster. I wanted to get the Moonveil. To do this, we went over to Gale Tunnel to fight the Magma Worm. As I began using Night Comet more, I started holding the Staff of Loss in my right hand. This is because the Staff of Loss grants a bonus to all invisibility magic, which Night Comet is a part of, but you get that bonus just from holding the staff even if you're not actively casting with it. So here, you'll see me casting with the Glintstone Staff in my left hand because it's upgraded and has a higher spell scaling, while the Staff of Loss remains in my other hand. Normally, this grants a 30% boost to damage, but sadly, it's been nerfed to only 10% for the mod. Also, on the topic of Night Comet, you'll see me use this spell a lot during this playthrough because it has good damage, a reasonable cost, and it's invisible to enemies so they won't try to dodge it. Anyway, not a whole lot to say about this fight. It took us a decent number of tries, but eventually we all got a feel for its moveset. Raz inflicted it with Scarlet Rot, Yakko kept hitting it with his sword, and I just kept using spells like Night Comet and Night Maiden's Mist. Now I had the Moonveil Katana. With that taken care of, it was time for Liurnia. Our next destination was the Academy, and in order to enter, we needed the Glintstone key. Usually it's just a matter of running over behind the dragon and grabbing it, but it wasn't there. And that brings us to one of the more inspired changes this mod makes. The key is now located in the dragon's mouth. It's tough to see, but yeah, it's there. So you gotta kill the dragon and get him to drop it, right? Well, I'm sure that's one solution, but I wanted to try something different. What if we staggered him and used the opening to try grabbing it directly out of his mouth? Wait. I'm gonna see if I can grab it. I see it right there. I got it!
Got it.
Holy shit! Such a fun idea, easily one of my favorites in the whole mod. Next, we made our way through the academy, and this is where I discovered that Eternal Darkness is actually incredible, at least for this area specifically. It summons a black hole that sucks in all incoming sorceries for 10 seconds. This is a hard counter to most of the enemies you'll find in the academy, and it's very satisfying to pull off. In fact, this one spell was essential to fighting the Red Wolf of Radagon. On top of just being more aggressive, it now fires far more glint blades. Like, sometimes it would fire 6 at once and then immediately repeat that attack. That's a lot more than the base game. At first, I was trying to block most of these attacks reactively, but there were just too many, and the 3 of us would often be split up from one another. Therefore, I felt it made the most sense to just keep Eternal Darkness up for basically the entire fight. Instead of using it reactively, the plan was to cast Eternal Darkness, and then all 3 of us would play defensively around the black hole and wait for the boss to approach. Then I just kept recasting every 10 seconds. This way, I could help enable Raz and Yakko to be safer by allowing them to focus more on attacking and avoiding the melee attacks instead of worrying about the magic. It took us a few tries, but we got it.
No. No. I'm dead. It's gonna be up to you, Raz. No.
No, you're good.
Hit him. Come on.
Holy
Nice.
shit.
While we were at the academy, I also made sure to grab the Graven School Talisman for a sorcery damage boost and the Radagon Icon Talisman to speed up my spellcasting. Next up, Renala, and honestly, not too bad. Phase 1 seemed the same as the base game, and then Phase 2 also wasn't too different. I think a couple of her magic attacks might have more projectiles, and she would now sometimes do a left to right sweeping attack with Common Azure instead of just firing it forward. But ultimately, we just learned to dodge these and kept hitting her. And since Renala is very resistant to magic damage, I use Rock Sling because it deals physical damage. And whenever she would summon something, one of us would take aggro while the other 2 kept focusing on attacking her. In the end, it only took 2 tries.
Yeah,
Nice,
fucking
nice, 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 nice.
stagger.
Here's heal.
Thank you.
Get the hit.
Got her.
Yes.
With the academy done, I wanted to spend the next few hours doing some side stuff around Liurnia. First up, Karya Manor. To the left of the outside of the manor, there's a new NPC enemy, and upon killing them, I received a brand new spell, and one that quickly became a favorite of mine, Glintblade Hail. As the name implies, it unleashes a hail of glint blades. It's not worth using for single targets due to its high FP cost, but my god, it's so satisfying when you have a group of enemies in front of you. I also like how it's based on something that already exists in the game. This is essentially just the glint blades that get shot at you when you try to approach the manor, but condensed into spell form. It's a cool way of repurposing an idea. Inside the manor, we fought Royal Knight Loretta. Due to the difficulty we were playing on, I believe she had more aggressive melee combos paired with more projectiles that were tougher to dodge. But once again, Eternal Darkness saved the day. Super fun fight, and I got Loretta's great bow to use for later. After this, we fought the Erdtree Avatar in the east to get the magic, lightning, and holy crack tiers, which Raz and I made use of for our spellcasting. Sadly, like everything else in this mod, these have been nerfed from a 20% damage boost to only 10%. I also made sure to grab a few spells such as Terra Magica. Usually Terra Magica provides a 35% boost to magic, but now, of course, it's nerfed to 10%. I'm sure you can see the pattern here with all the damage reductions. And yeah, it's a pretty effective way of preventing magic from reaching the ridiculous heights of the base game when you take advantage of every damage boost. While we were in the area, we also stopped at Jarburg and discovered another jumping challenge, but this time it was for Torrent.
I think this next jump, I have to jump from here and land on... I have to land on the platform that's sideways. Nah. Okay, I think I give up too.
Next, we ran over to the 4 belfries and teleported to the Chapel of Anticipation. After defeating the boss here, we made a pretty fun discovery: Starlight tokens. There was a stack of 10 on the ground nearby, and using these, we could interact with the altar inside the chapel to access a shop that had every item and spell in the game. This is a cool idea because it presents you with an opportunity to gain a weapon, talisman, or spell that you'd normally only get near the end of the game. Like, imagine Melania's sword for the majority of New Game instead of only for New Game Plus, you know? Anyway, we were all indecisive and decided to wait until later to buy something because Starlight tokens are a very scarce resource. The main other way of acquiring them is by using boss remembrances, and even then, you only get 2 tokens per remembrance. With all that taken care of, it seemed like a good time to move on from Liurnia, so we ran back to Caelid to get the Deckness Medallion. We already got the first half of the medallion earlier when we were at Fort Heights, though it's worth noting that it had been moved from the chest on top of the fort to a guaranteed drop from the knight nearby instead. I assume something similar had been done to the other half at Fort Faroth, and sure enough, it wasn't in the chest. We went on to kill every enemy inside the fort, yet it didn't drop from them. Turns out it had been moved all the way to Fort Gale on the other side of Caelid as a drop from the knight there. Before we went back to use it though, Raz suggested we try to fight the lion boss again. After all, we were stronger now, and we never even made it halfway last time. Here's how it went.
What is that?
Fuck is that? What the fuck?
Holy shit, he
alive?
turned into a fucking nuke, dude. I can't even see it through the smoke. He lit the ground on fire.
What the fuck? Is there a phase 2?
Holy shit. He's lighting the whole arena on fire.
Oh my god.
What is, dude? This is insane. What the actual fuck is this?
Just so much damage.
Guys, I
by
don't
the
think we're beating
way.
this right now. I don't think we're beating this right now.
I was feeling so good, dude.
That phase 2 explosion attack was terrifying enough to demoralize us after only one attempt. We decided to once again come back later. Oh yeah, and before we left Caelid, we tried killing the giant screaming dragon for some easy runes, but I think it was made immune to bleed damage. Also, even though you're usually safe to just keep hitting it from the side like this, the smaller dragons had their aggro range extended, so that's no longer the case. As a bonus, they have fire attacks now too. Jesus.
Alright. I'm gonna rest.
That seemed like enough Caelid for now. Back to Liurnia. We ran over to the Grand Lift of Dectus, but before we could use it, we encountered a new mini-boss, a tree sentinel that has this big attack where he shoots out a bunch of holy projectiles. It was a fun fight, and as a reward, we got the Javelin of Gold incantation, which was new to the mod. It's basically a lightning bolt that deals holy damage, and it does a big explosion when you charge it up. And with that, we used the Dectus medallion and began exploring the Altus Plateau. One of the first things we did was run over to the Shaded Castle. This is another good example of an area I had to take a lot more seriously than the base game. The main reason we were here was that we could get the Valkyrie's prosthesis from Millicent's questline, as that would give us access to more spells from Gallery. However, this item had been moved from the room it was usually in, and now it could only be obtained by killing the boss of the area. And on that note, holy shit, Elimer of the Briar. Good god. Spoiler alert, we got stuck on this guy for a very long time. Bosses like this guy made me realize that I never truly learned the movesets of a lot of boss fights in the game, in part because when I encountered them in other playthroughs, I would be over-leveled or over-geared. What made this fight even worse though was that on top of being extra aggressive due to raid mode, he had a new ability where he'd enter an enraged state. During this state, black smoke would pour out of him, and he'd start teleporting and become even more aggressive. Long story short, this dude never stops attacking, and some of his attacks did enough damage to one-shot us from a single mistake. He also countered our spellcaster heavy party because the attacks that are the hardest to avoid are the ones where he throws out his sword with telekinetic powers, and that's what he uses when you're further away using ranged attacks. This dude is surprisingly complex for a side boss. Anyway, we decided to call it quits after 10 or so attempts and come back later. Aside from wanting all of us to get a bit stronger, I wanted to see if I could somehow cheese him with the classic Common Azure build. To set this up, I need to find a few more components and level up my intelligence to 60. We killed the nearby Spirit Hawk and jumped into the next region. Here, we made sure to grab Golden Vow for Raz. This would boost both our attack and defense for 80 seconds, and from here on out, Raz would cast this before every boss fight. It came with the added bonus of giving us a bubble shield because Raz was using the Cleric Fortune, which provided this bubble shield whenever he cast a support incantation. Next, we backtracked into Altus to fight the ulcerated tree spirit in the capital outskirts. This allowed us to grab the giant crusher for Yakko, who up until now had been using a great sword, great shield combo mostly. It took a little convincing, but I told him this would probably be our best bet for big damage and staggers, and he wound up using it for the rest of the game. More bosses needed to die though, so we fought Spirit Godric with our new setup. I was experimenting more with crystal magic in the form of Shattering Crystal and Crystal Release, while holding the Crystal Staff in my right hand for extra damage. Both were pretty fun to use, especially Crystal Release, which was tough to find openings for, but rewarding when I landed it. For defeating Spirit Godric, we got the Godfrey icon, which was useful for both me and Raz. It boosted the damage of charged spells, although it had been nerfed from 15% to 9%. We continued to explore for a while. This part of the game right here represents what I think was the most fun part of the playthrough. It was just a blast running around with the boys, killing bosses, and exploring at a relaxed pace. During this process, we ran into one of the funniest encounters in our playthrough, the bugs in Seathwater Cave.
Dude, wait, why is he healing so fast?
Oh, he heals in the fucking muck, I think.
Dude, he's actually like almost full health again. What the fuck is this boss fight? He's full health. I'm sorry, what the fuck is this?
So yeah, what I think was going on is they would step into the muck on the edge of the arena, give themselves Scarlet Rot, and then they would just get crazy healing for the rest of the fight, to the point where it would just be unwinnable. We were laughing at the idea of 2 bugs in the cave being the scariest boss in the game. Needless to say, we gave up and kept exploring. We also made a quick stop back at the Chapel of Anticipation because Raz had decided on something to spend his Starlight tokens on, the Black Blade incantation. This was great because you normally only get it after beating Malekith, but now we had it as a tool for the rest of the playthrough. We made our way over to Mount Gelmir and decided to do Volcano Manor next. Time for the Godskin Noble. So first off, Black Blade is a fantastic opener for boss fights. It lowers their max health by 10%, but that damage still stays after the debuff wears off, so it's basically just several thousand damage for free. I also started to incorporate Frostbite into boss fights with Frozen Armament and Freezing Mist. Normally Frostbite increases the damage enemies take by 20%, but with the mod, it's only 10%. However, it now lasts a bit longer, 50 seconds instead of 30. Also, and this is the most interesting change, multiple applications of Frostbite can be stacked. It's difficult to pull off due to how high the resistances on bosses can be, but I went for it on every attempt against Godskin Noble, and I think I got 3 stacks once. Important to note, subsequent Frostbite applications don't reset the duration of the first one. Each application has its own duration. In other words, if I inflict Frostbite, but then it takes me 30 seconds to inflict the second stack, that leaves me with only a 20-second window where both applications overlap and will be active at the same time. Also, this ability to stack status effects applies to Poison and Scarlet Rot too. So theoretically, you could triple Scarlet Rot someone. We never did this, but looking back, we really should have. Imagine if this could be done to the player too. Like, imagine if Miyazaki made a swamp that poisoned you, and then double poisoned you if you kept walking through it. Fingers crossed for the DLC. Anyway, sorry for the tangent. Back to Godskin Noble. So I actually really like this fight. For challenge runs especially, my favorite fights are ones that allow me to be a little clever or use some problem solving beyond just learning the timing of each attack. Here, we made heavy use of all the pillars in the room to help us block attacks as we switch aggro back and forth. I know this is old news to most of you, but that bullshit rolling attack can be completely negated with the pillars. As we started getting close to winning, we were doing callouts like a Final Fantasy raid.
Okay. This might be good.
He's rolling.
It's not good.
He's on pine.
I'm okay, I'm okay.
Oh, he stopped. He stopped.
He's doing it again.
He's
He's doing
going
it
in again. He's jumped.
Jump
Grab
up.
him.
Fucking callouts.
Oh, I'm gonna charge heavy.
Fucking kill him.
Yeehaw! That's not enough. Nice.
Yes! Holy
funny.
shit.
Fuck.
That was awesome.
While we were at Volcano Manor, we also picked up the Royal Knight's Resolve Ash of War for Yakko, which he pretty much used for the rest of the game. This is a weapon buff that boosts the next attack by 80%, although it was tougher to use because it had its duration reduced from 10 seconds down to 6. Since we were in the area, I figured it also made sense to kill the big guy in charge. Not a whole lot to say here. I think his grab attack does a lot more damage now, but other than that, it was pretty close to the base game experience. At this point, I remembered that the main reason we were exploring was so that I could put together the Common Azure gimmick build. So I grabbed Common Azure from up on Mount Gelmir and fought the ulcerated tree spirit nearby to get the Cerulean Hidden Tier. In the base game, the Cerulean Hidden Tier grants you infinite FP for 15 seconds, and this was essential to the build. Basically, the whole idea was to give myself as many damage boosts as possible, drink the flask for infinite FP, and then cast Common Azure for 15 seconds straight. Unfortunately, I discovered that this item no longer gives infinite FP. Instead, it just heavily reduces the cost of spells for the same duration. Luckily, even though it wasn't as good, it still seemed like it might be enough. With all the components gathered and with all of us stronger, we went back over to Elmer of the Briar to test it out. It didn't... Wait, what?
What happened?
Oh my god.
Does it change in boss
No,
moves?
it has a massive stamina cost. I don't know if stamina.
Oh my god.
Yep, Common Azure now costs so much stamina that I couldn't even cast it for longer than a second. I hadn't noticed this while testing it earlier because there's no stamina cost for anything when you're outside of combat. And just like that, the Common Azure dream died. Between this and all the other nerfs the mod had been going for, I got the feeling that the mod creator wanted to remove all of the cheese from the game. And funnily enough, I checked the FAQ later and read exactly that.
Cheese builds is used as a blanket term for builds that focus on preventing enemies and or bosses from acting properly, typically by killing them so fast they don't have time to do anything. These builds are more or less universally removed by Reforged. This is accomplished through a variety of changes, but the most notable are that stacking % damage boosts cannot get anywhere near as insane as in vanilla, and options typically paired with them are reeled in a little bit, such as Common Azure.
Seeing the Common Azure strategy get singled out at the end made me laugh. Like, yeah, you honestly got me, dude. Damn. Obviously, I have mixed feelings about this, but I think it's an understandable goal. And if I'm honest, it did help me engage with parts of the game and elements of fights I hadn't before. I mean, that's what I thought in hindsight at least. In the moment, I was thinking, no, I gotta get good and fight this boss for real still. I'll spare you the details, but I think it took something like 30 tries in total. I tried to keep Frostbite on him, and we all did our best to play safe. We also tried to stay close to him to minimize the long-range sword attacks.
No, he teleported.
Yes! Oh my fucking god.
That was so clean.
That was good.
Fuck this guy. With that nightmare over, we finally got the prosthesis. So we gave that to Millicent, progressed the questline a bit more, and boom, Gowry had some new incantations for sale. He now sold Rotten Armament and Pest Threads, 2 incantations that were big for Raz. Rotten Armament is a new incantation added to the mod, and it's basically just rot grease as it buffs the weapon with Scarlet Rot, but it's a more reliable form of inflicting Scarlet Rot since you don't have to worry about crafting materials. Pest Threads also got an adjustment. Its base damage was lowered, but it now inflicts a bit of Scarlet Rot buildup on enemies. The idea here was that we could hopefully inflict Scarlet Rot on bosses more consistently, and if nothing else, it would help cancel out the passive health regen they had been getting. This is also when I decided to cash out some of my rune pieces to buy binding runes. Specifically, I got a few copies of the binding rune that would give me more passive FP regen during combat. It was very minor, but hey, maybe it would help me cast a couple extra spells over the duration of a whole boss fight. Now seemed like a good time to head over to Leyndell, so we needed to deal with the Draconic Tree Sentinel first. And my god, this fight was actually pretty brutal. One of the main reasons for this is due to how his lightning attacks have been adjusted. Normally, he'll have an attack that creates an AoE of lightning bolts around him, and a separate attack where a lightning bolt targets you directly and you need to just dodge at the correct time. These attacks are now combined. In other words, they now happen simultaneously every time and twice as often. Between this, extra fireballs, increased aggression, and just a lot of health, this guy was difficult. On my end, I did my best to get a couple stacks of Frostbite up, and then relied mostly on Night Comet for the rest of the fight, while also trying to stay within the Terra Magica circle. But yeah, we eventually got him after a dozen or so attempts. As we entered Leyndell, one of the first things I noticed was a new giant root pathway that had been added right at the start. This provided an alternative back entrance into the first part of the city. And yeah, I think little map edits like this are fun. From here, we progressed through the city until we made it to Spirit Godfrey. I was worried this would be another wall, but he actually wasn't that bad. I think at this point, all of us were settling more into our builds and becoming more effective overall. Upon beating him, we got hit with a tutorial window explaining that we now had the ability to equip a minor fortune in addition to our main one. Every fortune can be equipped as either a main or minor fortune. The trade-off for minor fortunes is that you only get 1 or 2 of the buffs the main one would get, but you also get none of the downsides. I decided to equip the wizard minor fortune, which gave me more FP regeneration when casting a spell and reduced the stamina cost of casting spells. Morgott was up next. It turns out that making an already aggressive boss even more aggressive is pretty rough. He was so effective at running us down that the plan was to not even try attacking if he was after you, and hope the other 2 could deal some damage. I think we only made it to his second phase once. We were getting ready to give up and return later, but then this happened.
I don't think we're gonna do this right now.
I don't see
Yeah,
what's
I think we have to either. Be
Let's give
stronger or-
Radon's dog a shot. See if we're
Yeah.
noticeably any stronger for that.
What? He died.
Okay. Honestly, a bummer, but oh well. My guess is that something bugged out with seamless co-op and made the ground lose collision for a second after we loaded in, causing him to fall to his death. There's actually a new boss revive mechanic that lets you refight bosses, and this would have been a great time to use it, but I didn't realize this was a thing until much later. So we decided to just roll with this unearned victory and go give Radon's lion, aka Radon's dog, another shot before progressing to the next zone. When we were fighting the lion, something interesting happened on our second attempt. He didn't transition into phase 2 properly with the big explosion, and he seemed to have fewer fire attacks as well. I'd like to think that there was an interaction with him getting frostbite and it canceling out the fire to some extent. This probably isn't true and he likely just bugged out instead, but it's a fun idea. Regardless, between that and the fact that we had gotten a lot stronger, we finally beat him. We got a new weapon that was added to the mod too. Fury of Azash. It's a curved greatsword with this cool flaming explosion attack that automatically buffs the weapon with fire after using it. But sadly, it didn't fit in with any of our builds, so we didn't end up using it. Time for Radon. This is where the true meaning of raid mode kicked in. I don't even know where to begin with this guy. First, a lot of the hitboxes on his attacks are just bigger now. For those of you who remember how Radon was nerfed shortly after the launch of the game, imagine all of those nerfs being undone as a baseline, and that includes his old hitboxes being restored. He also just uses far more gravity attacks now, including his Gravitas pool and Collapsing Stars attack. As for Collapsing Stars, there are now triple the number of projectiles. Depending on how far away you are from him, these are quite literally impossible to dodge now. In fact, I later learned from the mod creator themselves that the intent of this change was to actually just make the attack undodgeable, so that you need to rely on deflecting or blocking. 2 things our group rarely did. Look at some of this shit. I was doing it again. What a combo! Oh!
That's what I'm saying, dude. I'm dead.
So he has far more health, far more damage, a few new sword follow-up attacks, and the summons in the arena barely help. They now die in just 1 or 2 hits, so it was really just up to us. Eventually, we made it to phase 2.
Godspeed, gentlemen. Let's maybe split up a little bit, not stand next to each other. Oh, fuck. There, we got this shit. He just jumped back up.
Did he do it again?
I don't remember that from the base game.
I don't remember him doing it more than once.
Yeah, I think that's new.
Yeah, he just does multiple nuke attacks in a row sometimes now. Also, this is just a really long fight. Phase 1 alone took us upwards of 5 minutes to get through each time. Needing 3 people to perform for 10 plus minutes is a tall ask, especially when none of us are Lobos Jr. or Lil Aggie, you know? If even one of us died at any point during the fight, the run was over. I eventually realized this just wasn't happening. Unless we didn't play fair. You see, I thought back to my overloaded challenge run, where I stood near the edge of the water as Radahn transitioned into phase 2, causing him to fall to his death. Maybe that could work again.
You might be aggroed on one of the other guys.
I think it's me.
No!
It didn't work. I think FromSoft may have fixed this a while back by making him land a little bit closer, but I had another idea to modify this plan. What if whoever was being targeted jumped into the water just as he crashed down? That way we could cancel out the extra distance he was getting. It took many failed attempts to even reach this point in the fight, but we eventually tried it.
It's
Me.
you, Pine.
It's me, it's me. It's not
No,
me.
he changed his mind when you jumped off, dude. He fucking turned.
No.
Alright.
All right,
Should I
babe,
go
it
for
doesn't
it?
matter.
Should I go for it?
I mean, no, you can't. Did it work? Wait,
Yeah,
did it work?
as I died.
Yes! I'll take it, whatever. Whatever. What the fuck even happened?
It was super scuffed, the death cam bugged out, and I'm still not even sure what happened, but fuck it, we take those. We're down after 40 something tries. This opened up access to Nokron, and we rode down there so we could progress Ronnie's quest.
Making this jump is like insanely hard. Don't come down here, bro. I don't have enough for you, motherfucker. You bitch.
First, we bullied the Mimic tier fight, and then we ran down to the bottom of Nokron where we found a new boss, the Nox Night Maiden. And you know what? This is a really cool fight. So every time she loses a quarter of her max health, she'll summon an enemy from the silver Mimic goop on the side. Then you have to deal with the enemy summoned and the Night Maiden at the same time. Now I know a lot of people dislike duo fights, but I think this one is done surprisingly well. Whenever an enemy is summoned, the Night Maiden transitions into Mist mode. While she's in this state, she can't be hurt, and instead, she acts as a moving arena hazard, casting a damaging AoE mist. It creates this interesting dynamic where you need to constantly be avoiding her while trying to deal with the enemy she summoned. Anyway, it wasn't a difficult fight, but despite being part of a mod, I think this is a pretty solid example of a duo fight done well. We grabbed the Fingerslayer blade, went back to Ronnie, and continued her questline into Noxtella. We fought Dark Spirit Blythe, killed him, and then made it through the Lake of Rot. Estelle was up next, and goddamn, he was kinda tough. For starters, his laser attack now fired 3 lasers at once, making it much harder to avoid with iframes. He also was doing stuff like chaining his gravity slam attacks together to the point where if you got hit by the first one, you get comboed into the second one.
Ain't nothing I can do.
Do it again.
I'm sorry, again? Dude, I can't run out of it! He fucking double comboed me!
It just wasn't going great, and I thought part of the issue might have been our approach. He's 40% resistant to all elemental damage, so I thought we could all switch to physical. I also thought that going for more staggers could help us out a lot. For this, I had Rock Sling, but Raz didn't have anything. So we went back into the overworld, gathered up some Death Root, and got the Stone of Garok for Raz to use as a solid physical option that deals a decent amount of stagger too. Yakko also switched over from 1 giant hammer to 2 giant hammers for even more damage and stagger. This did the trick, and with that done, we finished Ronnie's questline with me receiving the Dark Moon Greatsword. I wound up replacing the Moon Veil with this. And one fun change is that the 2-hand R1 combos now have the moveset of the Holy Moonlight Sword from Bloodborne. Backing up a bit, while we were gathering the Death Root for Raz, I picked up a couple new spells that were new to the mod. The first spell I got was Singularity from the new Alabaster Lord boss near the Church of the Plague, and I think this clip showcases it pretty well.
And I'll do it again. Get over here, bird.
Sadly, it's not the best option for boss fights, but as you can see, it's incredibly effective at bullying normal enemies. The other spell I got was Volcanic Storm, located in the lava near Alexander. While also highly situational for most boss fights, it was kind of amazing to use for smaller side bosses.
Go for it. Yes. Come to my fire. Huzzah.
That's awesome.
That's hilarious, dude.
That's a game changer.
One last thing to wrap up before we moved on to the next main area. We went down to the sewers and fought Moog the Omen. This fight better showcases that stagger strategy we were going for with Rock Sling and Stone of Garank. We just kept staggering him and managed to beat him on our first try. The reason I wanted to come down here was so that we could get the Fingerprint Great Shield. It didn't fit in with our builds at the moment, but I knew from experience that it could be good to have on hand just in case. With all those detours taken care of, it was time to move on to the Forbidden Lands. For the mod, Torrent was now disabled for this area, and I think this is another example of a simple but interesting change. There are a surprising number of traps and ambushes with the Vulgar Militiamen, and it's very easy to ignore them normally when you have Torrent. Also, we fought a Night Cavalry while we were here, and I'm mentioning it because it resulted in a fun moment. Basically, Raz had died, and Yakko was low on health with no healing left. I, however, had 3 healing flasks left, so even though I had most of my health, I did the one thing that made sense.
Take my fucking spirit energy. I'm giving it all to you, man.
Thank you.
I'm out now.
Come on, you guys got it?
Yes!
Nice.
Holy shit, that was awesome.
I'm telling you guys, the shared healing mechanic is incredibly fun. We had finally made it to the mountaintops of the giants, and thus, the fire giant was up next. When we first attempted this fight, we actually thought we were being pranked. We kept hitting his leg over and over, but it was dealing almost no damage and his splint just wasn't breaking. After a couple attempts, we found out that no, we weren't being pranked. His splint just takes a lot more effort to break now. Other than that, there's nothing crazy to say about this fight. It's the fire giant. I hate this guy, and I hate him even more in a mod that makes him tankier. We got stuck for a couple hours, but eventually we just got good and we got it.
Now we just gotta play the best goddamn Elden Ring of our lives.
Let's fucking do
You
it.
guys got this, dude. I might kill him.
Come on, come on.
Oh,
A little bit
it's so
more.
close.
A little bit more.
Come on.
Yes! Holy fuck.
Before we teleported to Fair Missoula, I wanted to stop by the Haligtree for fun. When I tell you we were thoroughly outclassed by Loretta, I truly mean that. She just had a ridiculous amount of health, and at best, we were only barely getting her into phase 2 before we die or run out of healing. Eternal Darkness, while useful, wasn't enough this time. After beating our heads against the wall for a while, I had a really dumb idea. What if all 3 of us respec into strength builds and use the Fingerprint Great Shield? My idea was pretty straightforward. We could apply the Shield Crash Ash of War and go for repeated staggers. We could also use the Stone Barbed Cracked here for extra stagger damage, and we maximized our blocking potential with the Great Shield Talisman and Shield Grease. Did this work? Well, the Shield Grease was actually pretty effective to the point of us being able to block a lot of her magic attacks, but ultimately, we just didn't have the damage or stagger potential. It was a fun time though. So we gave up for now and decided to roll into Fair Missoula without changing back into our old builds because why not? Pancaking normal enemies with the boys is a fantastic experience, and I actually recommend just giving this setup a shot the next time you play Elden Ring if you want to have a good time. Next up was the Godskin duo, and oh my god. This was an experience. So we walked in with our great shields and immediately noticed a big change. There were 2 separate health bars for the bosses. In the base game, they just share one big health bar. So the optimist in me thought, hey, maybe the mod creator wanted to make this famously tough fight a little easier. Maybe now you can defeat one of them, and you only have to worry about the second one for the rest of the fight. After a couple pitiful attempts with the shield, we switched back to our old builds. The plan was simple. Yakko would hold aggro on the Godskin Noble using a Great Shield, while Raz and I focused on the Godskin Apostle. This was still tricky due to how aggressive both of the bosses were. In the base game, usually one of them will be more passive than the other, but not here. Anyway, after a few failed attempts, we pulled it off, and this happens.
That's 1 hammer. That's 2. Alright.
No.
Okay.
No!
No.
To all my Dark Souls 2 fans out there, they pulled a Throne Watcher and Throne Defender on us. Or in other words, we had to kill both bosses within a few seconds of each other or else they'd keep reviving. I didn't want to panic yet though. How about we just use sleep pots to keep one of them asleep and out of the fight while the 3 of us focus on the one that's still awake. In the base game, this is a very effective strategy because they'll stay asleep for a full 60 seconds. Now though, it's only like 10 or 15 seconds. On top of that, a cut mechanic was restored where the bosses will wake each other up, so sleep wasn't going to be very effective here. Therefore, we'd have to nearly defeat one of them, switch targets, nearly defeat the second one, and then finish both of them off at the same time without relying on sleep. One of the hardest parts of this was how much of an endurance fight this was. Like, some attempts would involve over 10 minutes of pure fighting and dodging. That's a very long time to go without messing up. It's truly heartbreaking when you're 11 minutes in and someone dies to some bullshit like the Godskin Noble's rolling attack. We were here for hours. So what exactly did we do? First, Yakko would enter the arena, get the noble's attention, and then do his best to keep him on the other side of the room while relying on his great shield to keep him safe. While this is happening, me and Raz are doing our best to fight the Apostle. Raz hits him with Blackblade to take out a chunk of his health, and I follow up with Rani's Dark Moon for the Frostbite buildup and to lower his magic negation for a minute. A couple casts of Freezing Mist, and boom, we got Frostbite. From here, Raz and I just need to play very carefully, switching aggro back and forth as I use Night Comet and he uses Lightning Spear. Additionally, Yakko is using a combination of Rot and Poison, bolts, and pots to deal some damage to the noble to give us a head start for later. After 5 or 6 minutes of this, we get the Apostle down nearly all the way and yell switch, at which point Raz and I run over to fight the noble while Yakko holds aggro on the Apostle. This next part is where we'd keep failing because one of us would usually fuck up. Maybe Yakko would run out of healing due to the increased pressure of a phase 2 Apostle, or maybe Raz and I would die to the rolling move on the noble. Again, this is a long fight. Eventually, we made it to this point right here. We were close, but Yakko only had 1 healing flask left, and the Apostle had recovered a good chunk of health from the passive regen. Sadly, Yakko didn't have a way of cancelling this regen out with poison because he ran out of consumables in phase 1. Anyway, I told Raz to go help Yakko while I dealt with the noble by myself. I was doing my best to kite him around while not dealing too much damage so that Raz and Yakko could catch up. We nearly had it until this moment right here, the worst case scenario. He was about to do his rolling attack, and I had to make a split-second decision on how to deal with it. Up until now, I'd been relying on the broken pillars to hold him in place while he rolled, but I knew from experience that he was too close to the pillar in front of him for this to work, and he would instead land on top of it during the roll. Therefore, I decided to run backwards because that's where the next closest pillar was at that moment. But then, oh no, I backed right into the Apostle. Here's how that played out.
Good chance to hit right there. Easy dodge.
Sorry guys, I'm sorry.
It's okay, it's okay.
Oh, I'm dead. Get him.
Okay, kill the other one. I just killed this one. I just killed Mini.
Yes!
Let's go.
Oh my fucking god! Oh my fucking god! Oh. I've never been so tense. I need to take a walk. Oh my god. I had so much adrenaline running through me. It was finally over. We might not be the best at this game, but you can't say we didn't put in the effort. Next up was Malekith. While far from a pushover, he really wasn't that bad compared to the Godskin duo. For phase 1, we noticed that he tended to attack whoever he was closest to more so than the other bosses. So we exploited that by putting Yakko back on Great Shield duty as Raz and I used our spells. For phase 2, we opened up with a barrage of poison and rot pots to get some free damage and help negate his health regen. And the rest of the fight was just trying to play as safe as we could by running around, using the pillars, and alternating who had aggro. It took us about a dozen tries, but we got him. Fighting Gideon was fun because it finally gave me an opportunity to break out Volcanic Storm again. Vaporizing him was a nice stress reliever, but the time for fun was over. We had made it to the big leagues with Godfrey. This fight is significantly harder than the base game, with Godfrey just being an absolute menace. He has a few new axe combos that leave little room for breathing. Also, his big ground eruption attack now forms an X pattern as opposed to a straight line like it does in the base game, so it's a bit trickier to avoid. We noticed his AI behaved similarly to Malekith, where he'd focus more on the person closest to him, so we tried having Yakko be the tank again with his great shield. This only got us so far because shit like this kept happening. I'm charging a spell.
We're stuck.
Oh my god.
Stop!
Fuck this. Fuck this. Oh my god. What the fuck?
I kind of guessed on that one, but it worked.
Whoa,
I-
okay.
I don't know
That's
that
why
I'm-
I didn't
Okay.
block it.
Alright. No. Fuck this boss. What the fuck?
Yeah, he stomps a lot now, and me and Raz kept finding ourselves in a position where we'd be mid-spellcast and unable to react. In fact, we struggled so much that after 20 attempts, we never even made it to phase 2 of the fight. It felt like we had truly hit a wall, and I was honestly considering if we'd have to give up here. But then I realized we'd been neglecting a very important tool for the entire run: Spirit Summons. Yeah, even though they're normally disabled for multiplayer, it turns out that Spirit Summons work for the Seamless Co-op mod, and they were available for all 3 of us to use simultaneously. So surely we just needed to summon 3 spirits, and that would be enough to pick up the slack, right? Well, it wasn't quite that simple. You see, Spirit Summons received a big rework as part of the Reforged mod. When you summon one, they begin in a passive state, where their damage is heavily reduced and they can't take aggro. In other words, they're borderline useless in this state. However, if you recast the Spirit Ashes for double its FP cost, the summon will glow red and become enraged. While enraged, they'll deal normal damage and have a very high likelihood of holding aggro. They'll also recover 10% of their max health. This enraged state lasts for 30 seconds and can be repeatedly cast throughout the fight if you have enough FP. I thought it would be fun to try using Blythe since his summon was new to the mod and we picked up his ashes earlier after completing Ronnie's questline. So within the context of a normal playthrough, this is a neat idea as it makes the player's role in using spirit summons more active rather than just summoning them once at the start of the fight and ignoring them after. Here's the issue though with our playthrough. The cost of enraging was extremely high, like my entire FP bar, and as a spellcaster, that meant that I'd have a lot less time to focus on casting spells since I'd be spending the majority of that 30-second enrage time simply getting the FP back so I could reactivate it. And all three of us would be dealing with this since enraging your summon only affects your own rather than your allies too. At least, that's what I thought. So I'm 99% sure this is unintended, but if we all use the same spirit summon, the enrage ability would affect all three of them. This was a huge discovery and suddenly made spirit summons a viable option again from an FP cost standpoint. Triple Blythe to the rescue. So this actually works pretty well. We took turns on who would need to use their FP for enraging the summons, and this allowed us all to be more liberal with our FP use for other things like spells. Additionally, Blythe can inflict frostbite, so we always had a couple stacks of frostbite on Godfrey for extra damage. Blythe would also heal himself with a healing flask once during the fight whenever he lost enough health. So that's an extra bit of survivability they all had. This was enough to push us into phase 2, and even though we didn't win, I knew that if we kept practicing our dodges and the timing of everything, we'd get it. After that attempt, we decided to call it a night. The plan was to pick up the next day and play some more. That's when I started to think. I thought back to the mod creator stating that they wanted to patch out all the cheese. And you know, spirit summon bug aside, it seemed like they'd achieved that. Our builds had never allowed us to completely negate a challenge. But here's the thing, I like breaking games. I like coming up with clever solutions. And the rebel in me wanted to find something that the mod creator may have overlooked. So I brainstormed before our next play session and came up with something extremely stupid, but maybe stupid enough to work. Maybe even stupid enough to work without spirit summons. Step 1. I respec to have as much HP as possible. First, I leveled up my Vigor to 99. You might think this isn't worth it because Vigor soft caps at 60, but this mod removes soft caps, meaning I would see meaningful increases all the way up to 99. Second, I equipped all the relevant talismans that provided extra HP, as well as Morgoth's Great Rune. These all received nerfs, but I made up for that by purchasing all 10 copies of the Binding Rune of Curse Health using the 200 rune pieces I'd collected over the course of the playthrough. Each of these Binding Runes provided 1% extra max HP for a total of 10% extra. Together, all of this gave me a whopping 4,172 HP. Step 2. I made myself as tanky as possible in other ways. To maximize my defense, I equipped the Bull Goat armor and the Dragon Crest Talisman +2. I also switched my Fortune to the Fortune of the Barbarian, as it provided extra poise, reduced how much counter damage I would take, and slightly increased how much healing I received after taking damage. Step 3. Here's why I was doing all of this. I wanted to use a weapon with the Prayerful Strike Ash of War. I got this idea from my overloaded challenge run I had previously done. The way this skill works is that it recovers HP on hit, but the amount of HP it recovers scales with your max health. In the base game, this is 30%, but in the mod, it's only 20%. Still though, that meant over 800 health recovered per hit. I equipped this skill on the biggest weapon I had, the Giant Crusher. But hold on, this strategy, while effective, actually hadn't worked on my overloaded run against Godfrey. So how would it work here if I was going up against a harder version of the same boss? It would work because of one pivotal detail I hadn't noticed until now. The Prayerful Strike skill affects yourself and nearby allies. So hypothetically, if there were 3 jackasses all running the same build, they could all be healing each other. And guess what? Even though the weapon and armor sent us over the weight limit so that we were overloaded, we still had the ability to run, dodge, and jump because the mod had reworked the overloaded status to be a viable playstyle that still allowed for these key actions. Additionally, we equipped the Shard of Alexander for extra skill damage. We also gave ourselves extra attack and defense by buffing ourselves with the Commander Standard and Golden Vow at the start of the fight. And for good measure, I crafted some Iron Jar aromatics to help tank hits even though their duration had been cut down from 40 seconds to 10 seconds. One complication we had to consider was that Prayerful Strike was far more expensive to use than the base game. Even with 30 mined, we could only use it 3 times before we'd run out of FP. So to help compensate for this, I figured it made sense to only use the FP flask instead of the healing flask. Since we had 14 each, that gave us a collective 42 flasks to share during the fight. And there you go, the ultimate co-op face tank build. At first the plan was to just use Prayerful Strike, but we quickly realized it made sense to mix in some jump attacks since we could still get interrupted easily, and sometimes we didn't need any healing. It was beautiful. It worked. Granted, it still came down to the wire with us using all of our FP flasks and me dying at the end, but by God, we did it.
Do a flip!
Alright, that was tighter than it should have been.
Yeah.
Before Radagon, I wanted to take a victory lap, so we went back to Loretta and the Halleck tree. Oh, the staggers are nice. The staggers are nice.
The corner, baby. Uh-oh. Oh, I need healing, boys.
Okay, I got you.
I got down to half health, dude.
Dude,
That was a close
to say,
one.
you were worried. I'm like, dude, still has 2,000 HP.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, do a flip.
Yeah, that's pretty easy. We absolutely crushed her. This build is terrifying. But was it strong enough for Melania? That's what I wanted to find out. In theory, it wouldn't work because Melania would be hitting all of us constantly and thus be healing herself constantly. And that's pretty much what happened, but we lucked out because the mod creator nerfed her healing abilities. She now only heals 1/4 to 1/2 as much depending on the attack, with the exception of her grab move, which now heals for a lot more. Like, straight up, 20% of her max health gets recovered off that one. It was an endurance fight, where we just had to out-heal her by taking advantage of stuns and staggers whenever possible. This was easier said than done for a variety of reasons. First, she would often move out of the way of our attacks because of how slow our swings were. Additionally, we were too slow to have any hope of avoiding her waterfowl dance, and that's because your movement speed still gets lowered when you're overloaded. She also had the original cut content waterfowl dance move restored on top of that. Imagine waterfowl dance, but without the wind up, so that you have no hope of getting away. That's pretty much what it was. Despite all of that, we pushed on. We made it to phase 2 before realizing that this just wasn't happening. She just moved around a lot more, to the point where we couldn't reliably trade hits in the same way we did for phase 1. She also used her large AoE moves far more than she ever would in the base game. But what if we brought back the spirit summons? What if we brought back Blythe? That's what we tried next, and since spirit summons are considered allies, Prayerful Strike healed them too. So it definitely went a lot better with them, but we reached the point in phase 2 where Melania just kept recovering all of her health, and we couldn't keep up with healing everyone for the same reasons as last time. She just moved around too much. We needed a little more to push ourselves over the edge. What about the Mimic tier? What about 6 dudes with 6 hammers? So the great part about this strategy is that the Mimic tiers would use Prayerful Strike to heal us and each other. That's a lot of potential healing. Obviously they don't use it constantly, but they also have infinite FP, so it's something they'll use over the duration of the whole fight. And since it's the Mimic tier, it costs HP, not FP to summon, and thus it costs HP to enrage them as well, which paired a lot better with our build. Basically, whenever they needed to be enraged, the person with the most HP would do it. But yeah, when all 6 of us were swinging, it was truly a beautiful sight.
The stagger. Let's go. Pop another cerulean.
Yes!
Kill her.
Get her.
Take her down.
Yes! Oh my god.
Genuinely don't think you could have done that without the summons.
That was so stupid. Melania had been defeated. The end was in sight. But I wanted to do this right. We started this long journey as a warrior, a cleric, and a mage. And I wanted us to finish it like that too. So we hung up the gimmick build and went back to our old setup. Radagon was absolutely brutal now. He received a huge overhaul to his combos with much more aggressive teleporting, and he'll even do teleport animation cancels on some attacks now. Like, it honestly feels like it crosses the line a little, considering we need to fight Elden Beast right after each time. We used the Blythe summons again to help out. We also relied on the buff Lord's Divine Fortification from Raz, as it increased our holy damage negation by 60%. So the strategy was mostly us just doing our best to stay alive and praying that our summons could hold aggro. It wasn't pretty, but we eventually got him. Imagine the jump scare I got when I saw double Elden Beast as we loaded into the next zone. Luckily, it was just a momentary visual bug. Unluckily, our summons would consistently bug out and not do anything when we reached Elden Beast. That meant we were on our own for this part of the fight. We could have chosen to hold off on summoning until we got to Elden Beast to avoid this, but I think Radagon is just outright harder, so we opted to use them for him. Once again, Lord's Divine Fortification was essential to keeping us alive. There was fortunately nothing crazy about this fight compared to the base game, but it was still a struggle due to how drawn out it was. Also, there was a new stance break fake out move that caught us a few times. Elden Beast would act like it just got stance broken, and then immediately follow up with an explosion attack. Anyway, after a few hours of suffering, we finally did it.
Fucking cowabunga.
Yeah.
Oh my god. We beat Elden Beast. We were done. But then as we were standing around in the ending area, I noticed a strange circle to the side. We approached it, and then this happened. Why is there no sound and why is there a glowing circle? What is happening? Wait, what?
Oh, no.
It's just
An avatar? Oh.
So yeah, there's apparently a secret super boss at the very end of the game for people who collected at least 200 rune pieces. And yes, I somehow managed to do that over the playthrough. This guy is basically if every Erdtree avatar combined into one. He has fire attacks, holy attacks, lightning attacks, and magic attacks, and he'll use all of them simultaneously. It's actually ridiculous. After a few failed attempts, we thought it would be funny to break out the gimmick build again, but with a twist. We cashed in our Starlight tokens to get extra hammers so that we could all dual wield. 12 hammers seemed like a funny way to end it all. At first it seemed to be working, but then as the boss began using all of his elemental moves, everything quickly fell apart.
Alright, that's the one that you don't get to see.
Alright, fair enough. We'd have to actually earn this one. We went back to our original builds again, but tried using Blythe this time to help. It was brutal still. The summons usually wouldn't last past the halfway point. Part of this was due to how the boss would constantly have a ring of fire around him that hurt anyone in melee range, so they were taking constant damage on top of all the other attacks. Here's some more to help paint a picture. Yeah, as you just saw, those magic projectiles were especially frustrating because they would fly off screen and give us virtually no time to react. We decided to switch to the Mimic tiers, and you might be wondering why we hadn't tried this earlier. The reason we hadn't was because I thought they would spend too much time casting useless spells like the spell generators, but then I realized we could reduce this by simply equipping more spells at once, thus giving them a higher likelihood of casting something worthwhile. So we gave it a shot, and yeah, we immediately saw better results. We made a few other adjustments that helped out. We made more of an effort to reapply Lord's Divine Fortification throughout the fight for that 60% holy damage reduction, because that was consistently the one type of attack that would always get us. Raz also equipped Erdtree Heal, the strongest healing incantation in the game, to heal us and the summons throughout the fight. And yeah, that one alone made a huge difference. Lastly, because we noticed the Mimic tiers weren't surviving for the whole fight, we purposefully waited to summon them until we were a good ways into the fight already. All of this together created a spectacle of teamwork. This felt like raid mode. This felt like a raid boss.
We're looking pretty good. I'm gonna go in for a heal.
Oh, and he's staggered. End him. Fuck him up.
Holy shit!
Dude.
Oh, that's hype.
And with that, Elden Ring Reforged had been officially completed on raid mode with only 3 players total. I seriously had such a good time, and I already miss running around with Raz and Yakko. If you're ever in the mood to replay Elden Ring for yourself, I think Reforged is a great option. Keep in mind that we were playing this on the hardest difficulty while also having below the recommended number of players, and that is not how you need to play this if you want to try it out. There are so many thoughtful changes that go beyond the difficulty, so even though I framed this video as a challenge run, I hope it's still clear that there's far more to this mod than quote Elden Ring hard mode. In the mod creator's own words, the intent was to create a more balanced experience with fair but still challenging combat. It's not about easier or harder, but more interesting and balanced combat. And yeah, if you were to play this mod on the normal difficulty, I think you'd find that that description is accurate. Anyway, thank you very, very much for watching. I'm gonna go take a nap now.